Andrew Carnegie, the poor Scottish immigrant who rose to become America's most powerful steel king. But behind the glitter of his empire lay a brutal price: exploited workers, bloody strikes, and later billions given away as one of the world's greatest philanthropists. But here's the mystery. Why did Carnegie sell his empire in 1901 for $480 million when he never wanted to sell at all? The true answer, a secret that forever changed the fate of dynasties, will be revealed at the end of this video. The immigrant risk, from hunger in Scotland to the rise of a steel empire. Picture this. It's 1848, and 13-year-old Andrew Carnegie is standing on the deck of a ship, watching the Scottish coastline disappear forever. His family isn't fleeing for adventure, they're running from starvation. Carnegie's father, William, was a handloom weaver in Dunfermline, Scotland. But the Industrial Revolution had arrived like a tsunami, and steam-powered looms were crushing traditional craftsmen. The Carnegie family was facing a choice: starve in Scotland or risk everything on the promise of America. With borrowed money and desperate hope, they sailed to Pittsburgh, a grimy, smoke-filled city that would become Carnegie's kingdom. But first, he had to survive. Information is power. Carnegie's first advantage. At 14, Carnegie landed his first job as a telegraph messenger boy, earning $2.50 a week. While other boys saw this as just another job, Carnegie saw it as his university. He memorized every street in Pittsburgh, learned the names of every businessman, and most importantly, he discovered the power of information. Here's where Carnegie's genius first showed. He realized that in the telegraph office, he had access to information before anyone else. Stock prices, business deals, shipping schedules, it all flowed through those wires. Information wasn't just knowledge, it was money, power, and the key to America's elite. By 18, he'd become the personal telegraph operator for Thomas Scott, superintendent of the Pennsylvania Railroad. This wasn't just a promotion, it was Carnegie's entry into the inner circle of American power. The steel gamble, risking it all for an empire. In 1872, Carnegie made the decision that would change everything. He visited a steel mill in England and witnessed the Bessemer process, a revolutionary method that could turn iron into steel faster and cheaper than ever before. The process worked by blasting air through molten iron, burning away the impurities, and suddenly steel could be produced on a massive scale. Most businessmen saw steel as just another metal. Carnegie saw it as the backbone of the future. He envisioned a world built on steel: railroads, bridges, skyscrapers, ships, and he was going to control it all. Carnegie sold all his other investments and bet everything on steel. His friends thought he'd lost his mind. Who abandons a diversified portfolio for a single industry? But Carnegie understood something they didn't. He wasn't just entering the steel business, he was creating an empire. Economic warfare, crushing rivals with control. Carnegie's strategy was breathtakingly simple and devastatingly effective. Instead of just making steel, he would control every step of the process, a method later called vertical integration. That meant owning everything his industry depended on. He bought vast iron ore mines in Minnesota, where thousands of tons of ore were pulled out of the earth every day. He purchased coal fields in Pennsylvania, the fuel that kept his furnaces burning. He acquired limestone quarries, crucial for purifying the molten iron. But he didn't stop there. Carnegie built his own railroads to transport the raw materials and even owned the giant ships that carried ore across the Great Lakes. Every mile of track, every ton of coal, every shipment of ore, it all belonged to him. His competitors, on the other hand, had to buy their resources from outside suppliers, paying markup after markup. They were always at the mercy of market prices. But Carnegie's steel mills fed directly from his own mines, his own railroads, his own ships. That gave him an unbeatable edge. His cost per ton was so low that he could sell steel for less than his competitors could even produce it. And when they tried to fight back, they were crushed by numbers they could never match. This wasn't just business, it was economic warfare. And in this war, Carnegie was untouchable. Domination by price. Carnegie's ruthless monopoly tactics. Carnegie's philosophy was brutal. Take orders at any price that keeps the mills running. When competitors tried to match his prices, he would slash them further. When they begged for mercy, he would offer to buy them out, at his price. One by one, America's steel companies fell to Carnegie's relentless assault. He didn't just want market share, he wanted total domination. By 1900, Carnegie Steel was producing more steel than all of Great Britain. A single man had built a monopoly so powerful it outproduced an empire. Blood and steel, the price of Carnegie's power. But Carnegie's empire came with a dark cost. In 1892, workers at his Homestead plant went on strike, demanding better wages and safer working conditions. Carnegie was conveniently in Scotland, leaving his partner Henry Clay Frick to handle the situation. Frick's response was swift and brutal. He hired 300 Pinkerton detectives, a private security force often used by the rich to crush worker protests. They were armed, trained, and acted like mercenaries, loyal not to the law, but to the men who paid them. On July 6, 1892, the Pinkertons arrived by barge at Homestead. Thousands of striking workers stood waiting, and soon gunfire broke out. It was a battle that looked more like a Civil War skirmish than a labor dispute, right in the heart of an industrial town. What followed became known as the Homestead Massacre, one of the bloodiest labor clashes in American history. The battle lasted for hours, leaving 16 people dead and dozens more wounded. Newspapers across the country seized on the story. To many, Carnegie, the man who preached education and generosity, now looked like a ruthless capitalist whose empire was built on broken bodies. Carnegie's empire would rise on his terms, and on the blood of those who stood in his way. The threat that changed everything. By 1901, Carnegie controlled 25% of America's steel production. He was 66 years old, unimaginably wealthy, and seemingly unstoppable. He had even announced plans to retire and dedicate himself to philanthropy. But J.P. Morgan had other plans. Morgan was assembling the largest corporate merger in history, what would become the United States Steel Corporation. A corporate merger meant taking dozens of separate companies and fusing them into one giant trust, a super company so big it could dominate the market. Such a merger was a revolutionary concept at the time, a kind of mega-fusion the world had never seen before. Morgan had already bought out most of Carnegie's rivals, but without Carnegie's massive mills, the whole project would collapse. To make the deal happen, Morgan sent his trusted lieutenant, Charles Schwab, a young steel executive who had once worked for Carnegie himself and knew how to speak his language. Schwab asked Carnegie to name his price. Carnegie's response became legend. He picked up a slip of paper, wrote down a number, and handed it over. $480 million, the equivalent of about $16 billion today. It was a sum so enormous that it instantly made Carnegie the richest man in the world. Most people think Carnegie was eager to sell, but the truth was far more sinister, and it reveals the one terrifying threat that forced him to give up his empire. The secret reveal. Here's what really happened, the truth hidden for more than a century. Carnegie didn't want to sell. At 66, he was planning to pass his empire to the next generation, building a dynasty to rival the Rockefellers and Vanderbilts. But Morgan found Carnegie's greatest weakness, his reputation. Morgan threatened to reveal the dark side of Carnegie's empire, the dead workers, the pollution, the political deals. Even worse, Morgan had papers linking Carnegie to the Homestead Massacre. If those became public, they would destroy the generous image Carnegie was trying so hard to build. Carnegie had to choose, sell his empire and protect his name, or fight Morgan and see his reputation destroyed. The threat worked. Carnegie sold, and the price wasn't just money, it was the end of what could have become America's greatest industrial dynasty. The last lesson, why power must be defended. Carnegie spent his remaining years giving away his fortune, building over 2,500 libraries worldwide, and establishing foundations that exist to this day. He died in 1919, remembered as the greatest philanthropist in American history. But imagine if he hadn't sold. The Carnegie dynasty could have rivaled the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the families that still control global finance today. Instead, Morgan's threat created U.S. Steel and cemented his own family's place among the richest families in history. Carnegie's steel empire became the foundation for other dynasties, other old money families who learned from his methods and his mistakes. Because true power isn't just about creating wealth, it's about defending it against anyone who dares to take it away. Thanks for watching. But the story doesn't end here. Click right here, and in the next video we'll reveal the hidden secret of a dynasty that shaped the world from the shadows. See you there.